It's a tough topic. Obviously, we're talking about it. Many of you have been talking about it a long time. Tired of talking about it, but it's important work. We're making progress, and compliments to you. So it's a privilege really to be here and just share perspective. That's really all. I'm going to be kind of the shallow marketing guy today because I'll be the low tech. I still think AI is artificial insemination, and I'm going to talk to you about what. A branded beef program, kind of how we see traceability. I'm going to kind of speak to you from a vantage point of certified Angus beef because that's kind of what I know. But I would think most brands would see life a little bit similar. So just for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with certified Angus beef, just so you know the lens that we look through and the lens that I'm kind of speaking from, we are a not-for-profit organization. We're based in Ohio. We're owned by the American Angus Association. Started back in 1978 by some entrepreneurial Angus breeders that said, you know what, if we create a brand that the consumer can identify with, that meets their expectation for a high-quality beef eating experience each and every time, ultimately that'll work in the marketplace and create more demand for our Angus cattle. And that was the simple idea, if you will, and that ultimately over the last 40 years has continued to evolve and continued to grow. But the idea and the mission is still the same. And I share all that just because I think we only own that trademark as an organization. We never own cattle. We never own packing plants. We never own grocery stores or food service distribution companies. We work with them. We partner with them. But it's ultimately about creating demand. And when you let the marketplace work and you work in a way that's scalable and practical within our industry, in a complex industry, these things tend to work. So maybe an overnight success that took 40 years to happen, as we've been described. But the program and the idea has worked. And that's so the last few years we've sold over 1 billion pounds. This year, it'll be over 5 million head will be certified into our program, meeting all of our carcass specifications. That's about 1 in 5 fed cattle in the U.S. today are going into the certified Angus beef program. Maybe the stat up there I'm most proud of is again, if you create it and let the marketplace work. Last year, over $75 million in direct certified Angus beef grid premiums were paid by the packer back to the owner of those cattle when they sold them to the packer. And so again, these systems tend to work. These value-based systems tend to work, and you got to be patient. But it's been a pretty nice success story. You know, this backdrop, as I kind of think about, again, lots and lots of really important discussion that's going on relative to animal disease traceability. I don't think about that every day at all, to be very honest with you. I'm probably thinking about it from, as I think about traceability, as we think about it from a branded beef standpoint, it's more about the value add that could come with traceability systems, right? And again, a lot has been said over the last handful of days about what the consumer is asking for, what the consumer is demanding, what the consumer wants, and we could debate a lot of this all day long about what they say they want and what they're going to buy, where's that disconnect? And I would tell you, we have some of the same skepticism that you probably have, and I know many cattlemen have, as it relates to a lot of these. We call it beef with adjectives, right? A lot of these other claims and things that get put around the meat case. But and that bottom graph or table rather is probably hard to read, and I apologize for that. But I just some of you may be familiar with a publication that Meiden Marketing and Sealed Air puts out called The Power of Meat. They publish it every year. And it's probably as good a database that I'm aware of that speaks to these value-added claims and what they look like, at least at retail. This is retail only, and probably hard to see here. But our conventional meat case was relatively flat last year, both in dollar sales and in tonnage. Where you see some growth is down in these claims around natural or antibiotic-free, both in dollar growth and in volumes. Now, we also realize these are smaller markets, right? These are not significant components of our industry, yet today, but we believe they continue to grow. And I tend to spend a lot of time in grocery stores. My kids hate going on vacations when we have a little bit of free unscheduled time because we get to go to the grocery store and walk around in the meat case. Well, they go somewhere else. I walk around in the meat case. Just yesterday, when the program was over, I went over to the Super Target. Hadn't been in a Super Target for a while. We all need to do that. If you don't do that, and cattlemen and producers need to do it, to understand kind of what's going on a little bit. Now, I know the technical orientation of this audience. If you have high blood pressure, I would suggest you take your blood pressure medicine first, maybe you have a glass of wine, and then go walk around in the meat case and look at some of the claims and some of the things that are being talked about and marketed in not just meat, but in eggs, in milk, throughout the entire store. So these things are growing. When we look and we talk, obviously, an awful lot about this next generation of consumer that's coming up. These things are expectations, and I do believe that more and more. We got to put a really high quality product in front of them, but they're looking for more and more assurances. And as a brand, that operates in this premium space, in premium category, we believe that scrutiny of our brand is probably higher and more rigid than what we would see of a commodity product, right? There's an expectation not just about our product and how it performs, but the social responsibility around the whole supply chain. Right, and that we are operating in a very responsible way. So that's kind of, I guess, the backdrop as we look at the industry and as we think about it futuristically. Not so much today, but definitely futuristically. As I said, I'm going to be kind of the shallow marketing guy and really just not talking about traceability in terms of its functionality from an animal disease traceback and the important elements of that, but more as how do we talk about this to our consumer. And I love the question that was asked of the last speaker of is traceability, I think, is traceability a marketing claim? I would argue it's not. And I would also agree, I think, with the consensus there that the expectation is we can trace our product today. So I think any time when we've tried to message around traceability in and of itself, that diagram I've got there, that map, that's important, that we could track a feeder calf that came out of Florida and all the owners and stops that it's had along the way. That's really, really important that we can do from an animal disease standpoint. That's not exactly the image that the consumer has of production agriculture, right? It's more, unfortunately, like old McDonald's farm over there, right? That is, so when you start talking to them about the realities of our business and the realities of our supply chain, wow, that gets to be really, really complex, really, really fast. And so I just throw that out. And I know this has been said by other speakers. I truly believe, and we would see traceability not as a marketing claim, right? It's a framework by which we can build an awful lot of value-added marketing claims too. But traceability maybe in and of itself is not. So I throw that out there just as again, through our lens, kind of how we see this subject. I did want to share some things how we today are looking at traceability, and maybe I should have traceability with quotes around it here, because it's maybe not a full animal traceability like we're talking about, but ways that today we do make assurances. We have a natural line of products that we make assurances on how that animal was raised. It's a never ever program, so that ultimately requires that we can trace that product to its ranch of origin to ensure that calf never had an antibiotic given to it, supplemental growth promotants, all that sort of thing. So we do that through affidavits, just no different than most any other natural program that's out there. But it's obviously a form of traceability that we rely on today. We work with a program called Path Proven. That's Performance Food Group, and some of you may be familiar with that system. They're doing some innovative things as it relates to DNA cataloging on the carcass. And being able to track the end product back to that carcass identity. That's more of a traceability to the feed yard than it is to the ranch of origin. But again, programs that as they have evolved, as a brand, have come in alongside and worked with some of those supply chains to maybe add further value, both for our brand and maybe for that existing supply chain. We've had a lot of interest around what we kind of in our shop call regionally sourced claims, and so today we've got product, our brand going out as product of the Northwest. We've got a product, a fresh from Florida. We've got a Go Texan program that we work with, again, existing systems. Those as the Texas and Florida programs, those are State Department programs that we've come in alongside of and worked with, and again, maybe put our branding on top of that traceable supply chain to make some additional claims that our end users have been asking for. Thad covered brilliantly the importance of traceability and market access, and I put it up here because I'd remiss to not throw it up. 15% of our total sales go to international markets, and you know, I remember my first trip to Japan, and this was some years ago. And I forget how many meetings I went into in Japan, and again, it pales in comparison to what Thad does on his travels. But I think it was like 22 meetings I went into in a week's time. And if I recall correctly, like 20 of the 22, the first topic they wanted to talk about was traceability. And that was over 10 years ago, right? And so this is not new. This is an ongoing, and again, Thad again shared perspective on that incredibly well. We would just echo how important it is. And maybe a little bit of a unique one for us, in that the fact we only own that trademark, that there is a brand assurance, as we would call it, or a trademark integrity component that today our product starts at the packing plant and at the packer facility, where USDA or Canadian Beef Grading Agency is the oversight body that says that this particular carcass and animal has met all our specifications. At that point, we have an audit and a supply chain audit that starts to a requirement of all packers is to report every pound of their certified Angus beef brand sales to us, the bill to, the ship to, all of the amounts, all of the details of that, minus price. Okay, and then we license every tier of distribution, and all licenses for us is simply we give a Cisco or a Kroger the rights to use our trademark in their marketing and promotion. But part of that requirement is they have to report their distribution of that product, and so we have a system and a team of people in our organization that does checks and balance audits throughout that, all the way to the restaurant. I throw some menus up there because we have a pretty extensive menu collection system that we work with our distributors and our own employees and many others to collect menus, to make sure our brand, our trademark is being used accurately and correctly. And if a restaurant is using our trademarks on their menu, that they are in fact consistently buying our product, right? The worst thing that could happen to us from a brand assurance and a brand equity standpoint is someone that's utilizing our trademarks on their menu but buying a subpar product. And that really, obviously, you understand how that could be detrimental. So as a brand owner, not owning any of the distribution or any of the retail or wholesale or production of any of this, that part is really important to us. So I get kind of excited about where things could be long-term from a traceability standpoint, with new technologies and new innovations in this whole space. Trade. I use an example up there of a Japanese advertisement and promotion of our brand, and as you can imagine, how hard it is to ensure trademark integrity here in the U.S. As you start working outside into 50+ countries where we sell today, that even gets far more complicated. So I share all of that as just maybe a little different thought process around traceability, but that's really, really important to us as a brand owner, and I'm sure all other brands would agree with that statement. So kind of thinking, I guess, then long term of where could we go, right? What would this vehicle, this framework of traceability allow for in the marketplace? And that's kind of how I think about it. And a lot has been said about these things throughout the last day and a half here, and I'm sure there's others that could articulate many of these points better than I. But these are things that we think about, and one obviously is demand protection, right? A real or a perceived threat to consumer trust in our product. You know, the ability to have a traceability system that we could be proactive or at least confront some of these assaults on consumer trust would be obviously very, very important. Animal care and handling, environmental impact. These are things, and I know there's a speaker next who's going to talk about this crossroads of sustainability and traceability. And while I don't know what the presentation is going to be, I believe we probably see it exactly the same way. As there's more and more expectations, and we tend to talk about the consumer. But next week I'm going to be with 40 chefs down in Texas, and we're taking them to ranches, and we're taking them to feed yards, and we're taking them to packing plants. And those, I tell you, they have harder questions than your average soccer mom that you run into, okay? And they're very, very influential, right? What a chef believes can influence an awful lot of other chefs and other consumers, right? And so we've strategically have worked very, very carefully and extensively with chefs throughout this country and around the U.S. And it's to talk about these things. And I know a lot of cattlemen start getting and producers start getting scared when we start talking about care and handling and environmental impact. And I truly believe we're not talking about doing something different. We're just simply talking about documenting all the really, really good stuff we do today. That traceability framework allows us to maybe allow that communication to happen. Employment practices, again, all these other whatever sustainability metrics might come about in the future. And then I'll throw kind of a whole category of ideas as I think about this. Some of this is specific to a brand. Some of this I just think about the beef industry as a whole. How much better we could be if we got a more accurate production sector feedback mechanism in place, right? We know in the cattle business the amount of information flowing backwards in terms of how good of a job we're doing or maybe not good of a job we're doing is quite limited. You know, think about how much improvement we could make if we had a better feedback mechanism or, again, a vehicle, a framework to allow some of that to happen. You know, I get pretty excited when I think about where our genetic tools are today relative to genomics. But I get maybe more excited about where I think they're going to be 10 years from now. And the ability, I mean, think about what we can potentially do if we do a better job of identifying cattle with respiratory disease in the feed yard and possibly being able to do a better job of tying those to genetics. Genetic lines, whatever that might be, and to better do a better job of developing our tools to make healthier cattle, right? Cattle that do whatever things that we need them to do in a more efficient way. We're still pretty antiquated, I would argue, in our industry around supply management and candidly risk management. And I think when I think about a framework of traceability and the ability to communicate information a little more seamlessly up and down our supply chain, when I think about blockchain, and I'm like you guys, I'm watching all the TED Talks and all the things, trying to keep up, right, with what this is and how it's going to impact our business. But what little I understand is I think it obviously, as probably most do, believe it could be pretty monumental in terms of our ability to just get far more sophisticated in how we manage risk and how we manage our supply and just make far better decisions up and down our supply chain. I tell you, when I talk to our food service folks, our retail folks, the information that they make their decisions on is candidly a bit scary at times in terms of supply. I remember, and I'm a cattle kid, I'm animal science trained, and I remember coming to Certified Angus Beef. I've told this story before, but one of the things I was most excited about is kind of getting to peek behind the curtain at these major retailers and these major meat buyers and understand and see all the sophistication by which that they manage their supply and determine their price. And I've continue to be a little disappointed. Okay, when you look behind the curtain, there's not a lot there. And no disrespect to our folks in that business. They run an incredibly complex business, but things that tie our supply chain through traceability together better allow for those analytics to just grow exponentially, and everybody benefits from it. So that's, I guess, as I kind of again, some of that is very specific to us as a brand, but I think maybe just bigger picture, some things that popped into my mind as we think about what could be, right, as a traceability system evolves.